Yeah. Back at it. Like a great holiday
So
snack
let's get it, man.
habit.
Hey, what is that, Papa? Is that something new YouTube thing?
Whoa. It's now full screen.
They didn't change something.
Okay.
So don't mind us. I noticed something pop up on the screen from that YouTube must have just recently changed. Yo.
Where the flowers?
So.
The little flowers that we have.
Can't you really see them? Sometimes I adjust the screen so much it crops them out.
Oh, okay.
So I saw this, and it said the disturbing truth about breeding farms during slavery. Breeding farms.
Breeding farms?
Like
no, this is completely new to me.
With massa or with their? I mean, no, it can't be with massa. It's with producing more slave, more workers. That's probably what they mean.
Breeding farms.
Breeding farms.
You breed animals. You don't breed humans.
That's not how humans were. Blacks were considered.
Let's see
in that
what they
time, depending on where you were.
Because I never heard about this ever in my whole entire life.
Until now.
History ever. Let's go.
The antebellum period of American history is characterized by disturbing slavery. Its entirely economic output was dependent on slave labor and the reduction of persons into property. Yet at the turn of the 19th century, the transatlantic slave trade saw huge opposition. Acquiring slaves was no longer an option for colonial powers, so there had to be other ways. Welcome to Bizarre History. Today we examine the story of breeding farms in antebellum America.
It comes out. They come out.
Oh,
I pull mine wrong.
What in a
They
Sam
supposed to come
Hill?
out so it make it.
Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
they just pivotal.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Laws and acts passed across the 18th century in America steadily degraded and destroyed any personhood an enslaved individual had. This process most pointedly took the enslaved from personhood to thinghood, leaving all rights belonging to the owner of the slave and not the person in slavery. As this ideology and culturizing took hold, the sale and purchasing of slaves became accepted, with no objection from American society or its people. There is little altruism to be found in the action of prohibiting slave importation to the United States. The key players in the politics of formative America at the time show us this. President Thomas Jefferson was a renowned slaver, siring 6 children with the woman he owned, Sally Hemings, and Virginia native, well aware of the economic
Wait, did he say Thomas Jefferson had 6 children with one of the women he owned? He had 6 mixed babies? Really?
Man. Wow.
Wow. Okay, that's history I never knew. I never knew that he was dropping it off and had a bunch of mixed
Kids.
babies.
bone slavery was to the South. Far from the end of importing slaves creating the spark to fire up abolition, the decrease of external slave supplies meant the value of domestic slaves would rise. People had become products along with being the means of production. Virginia, Jefferson's state, would become the leading state in the production of slaves. Over time, the sale of slaves became its leading export product, even above tobacco.
Wow.
At the turn of the 19th century, the transatlantic slave trade was coming to its end. In Britain, William Wilberforce led a movement made up of Quakers and evangelicals to set up the Committee for the Abolition of Slave Trade. Come 1807, the Parliament of Britain passed the Slavery Trade Act, and the turn of the tide in colonial Britain increased calls for the abolition of slavery in America. At this time, the economics of slave labor and its produce was only growing in America. The production of sugarcane, cotton, and rice, particularly in the Deep South and Western America, were lucrative to the point of being viable political capital. Before the American Civil War, King Cotton was a phrase used to summarize the productive monopoly slave states had over abolitionist states in the North. This importance of cotton.
And still to this day, I think I was listening to Charleston White. He was talking about how cotton to this day, if you got into it as a business, it makes you. It's another thing that can make you wealthy. He said there's only about 12. He said maybe 10 or 12 families that run the world when it comes to the cotton thing. And he said that if you found some way into working, getting a connection with them, you would be, you find unlimited wealth just still within cotton to this day. Did you know that? That's crazy.
No, I didn't.
Economically, had secession states convinced there would not even be a chance of war with northern states. Yet, in the layered, complicated history of the United States, at a time when slave labor was at its most profitable for America, Congress and President Thomas Jefferson supported calls for abolition. From 1808, importing slaves to America was prohibited as the cotton engine was invented and its production and demand for labor only rose.
Okay, what's the breeding part?
The 1808 Prohibition Act served as a great protection to the internal slave market, and slave owners doubled down. Quite chillingly, slave owners referred to breeding as a natural increase, despite the clear management and collective efforts that went into it. In an utter tangle of priorities, black women enslaved in America became a rare pillar, receiving free health care, if not the very first. As termed by Ned and Constance Sublettet in their book The American Slave Coast, the enslaved woman's womb became capitalized. Fertility and its safeguarding became of the utmost.
Wow.
The womb got. So is this where no. Prostitution was way before those times. But wow, they start capitalizing off of them through slavery. But prostitution existed before. But
Wow. That is crazy.
Well, maybe was this the origin of pimping?
Sounds like it.
Important to those in the slave trade. It's understood that home medical journals began to be circulated to aid slaves through difficult births when the matter would have been previously disregarded. Black female slaves were expected to produce 4 to 5 children. Let there be no mistake. The high mortality rate of slaves was a cornerstone of breeding's importance. Good breeding stock was commonly used to advertise a female slave for sale.
Wow.
Many women in these circumstances would have found themselves being continually bartered and incentivized by slave and plantation owners.
Wow.
It was not uncommon for an enslaved woman to have been posed an offer of freedom should she bear 15 children.
So wait, that just made me think about, how our moms and their parents came from humongous families. That's why. It wasn't the fact. It was biblically. I was going to say biblically. Let me stop. I'm going to say just even back then, because I know not everybody believes what we believe, but even if you go back, way back when, it was always more of a blessing to have a lot of kids. But I believe, I don't know, it could have been them generations before us. It might have been because those results of slavery, having all those kids. Because think about it, whoopings and all that spanking and beating you, that came from slavery. So why wouldn't have all the kids come from slavery?
I don't know, but my grandmother and grandfather were not parents, weren't slaves. So
my grandmother wasn't, but my grandfather was a. I need to check with my mom because I think my mom said my grandfather might have been, or he was. I need to double check my mama because something with my granddad. My granddad, South Georgia, was originally from Miami. My mom, I distinctly remember she saying something related to slavery. I don't know if it must have been his granddad or him, because I know it was him, because my grandpa Jack was born in.
No, couldn't have been, because my grandma was born in 1909. I remember her telling me that.
My grandfather was born before then.
Your granddad.
My granddad
wasn't born in 18 something.
Yes, he was.
Your
He died. He was.
You mean great?
No, my grandfather was a old man when I was a little bitty boy. He was like ancient, like super old when I
I'm
was a
gonna
little
say
boy.
fact check that.
No, my grandfather was already. He was in his 80s when I was a little bitty boy. In the 90s. This in the 90s. Early. No, this the 80s. I remember.
Okay.
I'm gonna double check my mama today, man.
Yeah, I would definitely do that.
Because if he was born, maybe he was born 1901, but he was born 18s or he was born 1901. It's one. Because he was a lot older than my grandmother.
Ended.
Listen, he was a lot older than my grandmother.
Okay.
The reality was a child as young as 12 to 13 could be forced into pregnancy and give birth to a child that would be taken from her only to be forced into a life of slavery.
Whoa.
But people had become products under this system. The means were nothing short of dehumanizing. Childbearing for women slaves would start as young as 13 years old. It's more than possible that 4 to 5 pregnancies would have been expected by the time she turned 20. Vulnerabilities faced by enslaved women in a system expecting breeding from them were multiple. It was not beneath this slave market of the 19th century America to sell women slaves during pregnancy. Many would contend that the life of a female slave in America would have been a cycle of rape, pregnancy, and uncared-for birth, recovery over a matter of just weeks before pregnancy was expected again.
Wow.
Masters and slave owners have been detailed in numerous accounts as fathering slaves themselves. With no rights and a legal blockage to any form of personhood, this system forcing children out of women can only constitute rape. Breeding farms held...
I was going to say, because that little girl looked like she was, don't you look like she had a little mixture?
Yeah, so whoever the lady was, she must have been the wife of whoever husband's that of the child.
Right.
Yeah.
The inequality of white owners being legally protected while their black counterparts had none. Sexual abuse would only be considered one way. Slave accounts reveal that it was commonplace for slave owners to be intrusive in the sex lives of their property. Arranged marriages and forced mating were part of the breeding culture that started in slavery. With people regarded as chattel, the conditions of their breeding mirrored that of animals. Slave testimony includes the reference to stockmen. Stockmen were male slaves brought to farms to impregnate female slaves of their given owners.
Wow.
So that means they had to pick men that they knew that could really populate. Like you really were. Because it's a lot of guys out here that can just have unlimited amount of kids. They'll have no stoppage.
This importing of bucks became a theme throughout breeding. Slave owners looked to produce as many slaves capable of the hard physical labor of working fields. There is a famous study by economist Richard Stooch examining the farms of Virginia in 1860. Stunningly, the ratio of female to male slaves was around 2 to 1. The study found in total that the amount of females outnumbering males was as many as 300,000. This would have solely been for the lucrative domestic breeding industry. The inherent racist ideology rooting slavery in America meant slave owners forcing their will on their slaves would have been thought righteous by many. Along with blindness to the systematic rape of the breeding farms, white owners felt their will would have been preferable to that of black slaves.
Okay, what was the whole point of the Oprah Winfrey?
That was a random shot of, what was that, Color Purple?
Color Purple,
Well,
oh
that
my
was so
gosh.
random. Like, okay, somebody just had
Slaves
had
faced
to
the
buy
most danger of being victims of their master's rape. A consequence of this would be many childbearing slaves would shield their children from their master's wife for fear of revealing the father. The account of Harriet Jacobs, a house slave in North Carolina, attested that her master fathered as many as 11 slaves.
Wow.
None of this factory breeding and abuse was for anything other than the reinforcement and strengthening of profit. Accounts include those in the slave trade remarking at the profitability of their breeding farms. A Virginia slave trader declared that the use of enforced breeding policies had brought him 6,000 slave children to sell over a calendar year.
Wow.
Thomas Jefferson is alleged to have boasted that Virginia's capital raised 4% every year through the birth of black children. Once people were considered to be property, the money made from the industry developed and furthered. By the mid-1800s, the South's slave trade has been estimated as worth around $4 billion.
Wow.
This utterly dwarfs the national income in gold and silver, overall currency, and even southern farmland. The slavers had made slaves more valuable than they ever could have thought possible. Most shockingly, the slave trade over the opening decades of the 1800s took slaves from property to securities. The humanist side of taking people.
I don't know if that person if that image gets recycled, but it's been like 2 videos where we saw that same image on there.
I'm just like, $4 billion. No wonder people talking about reparations. I'm just saying. Darn.
Personhood and reducing them to property has long been outlined in the history books. The legal side of turning people into property has been less explored, quite possibly for its stomach-turning consequence. Slave owners of the 1830s wanted more capital in their states and realized a way to do it through the lack of legal status any slave had, by mortgaging them. Banks were set up in informative southern states, including Louisiana and Mississippi, where slaves were mortgaged as properties to the banks. These mortgages were repackaged into bonds that could be sold globally. This meant many over the world where slavery had been outlawed were profiting from bonds backed by their value. In a sardonic twist, arguably, the prohibition of the slave trade ended up developing the financial roots it formed over an allegedly enlightened world. If you want more of history's long-held secrets and darkest confessions,
wow, that is a long-held secret that, that we've heard.
Well, yeah,
for
it's
us.
probably been out there, but we just haven't heard about it.
Yeah.
I mean, that is crazy. So, I mean, I was aware that slave masters had sex with the slaves.
We all knew about that.
Right. But breeding and having a system about how they went about it, and even giving the slaves, women, incentives of being free after having 15 kids, are you going to even survive? Because their medical treatment and stuff like that, they could care less about the slave getting the proper care.
That treatment didn't exist back
then.
then.
But they developed some type of guide for them, for the masters or midwives or whoever would see about them, I guess, to help them heal better.
Had to be, because they said they got the free health care, so whatever that health care entailed back in them times.
Wow, and they just were so insane to the membrane for them to even think that that was okay. You know what I'm saying? It was like, how do you even wrap this around in your mind? That's something okay, but that wasn't even. They didn't care. We already know that.
What happened to the children that were mixed? So you have a mixed child that gets around the non-mixed children. How was that? Like, how could you imagine a child trying to adapt, and you're the son of the master, where you always just completely in the house, like how he was talking about that one lady. She said that her master had 11 slave children. So did they all 11 live in the house? Because I just couldn't see, you are so fair, bright skinned, and they tell you go outside, you mixed and brown. I doubt it. You must be in the house at that point.
Yeah, I don't know. Because what is the wife of the husband of the slave man?
I guess it was okay.
The slave master, what is she? No,
probably to some degree it's okay to have 11. That ain't no mistake. You hitting it every day.
That's crazy. Wow,
man.
So I wonder how long this went
tough.
on, because this was. Did he say it started? Well, it must have been. I don't know, because he said 18 something, but I counted like there's only 4 years left enslaved. Before they. Well, no, maybe it was more. I was going to say before the Emancipation Proclamation was written.
Yeah.
But I don't know, how could they even just get away with that? But that was the mindset then.
True.
You know, and it was all about
That
production.
wasn't mindset. That was the regular stuff. That was normal.
Yeah, of all the ways of making more money.
So it like now I go back, I can't be like because you know how can you when that was like how we're sitting here today. That was just
Common
life.
practice.
We just feel that way because we weren't never in it. We were never slaves, and we didn't have to go through it. So that's what we feel. But that was like putting your T-shirt on.
But that was more in the southern states. He said, not up north. Yeah, he said it was kind of like more of a southern thing versus in your northern states. The northern states were where the abolitionists that were trying to abolish the slavery.
You know what? You know why that would make sense? Because in the South, I wonder if it was a financial thing. That's why instead of them going out and getting new slaves from the market or getting them from the slave trade, they're like, no, I'm just going to breed my own free. Think about it. The South didn't have the money. I think things were financially a lot different from the South than the North. I think that was a money ploy. Now, when you think about it, it's like, no, I'm gonna breed my own slaves.
$4 billion.
We're not gonna get new slaves at the trade. We're gonna Annabelle Jenkins is gonna go and I'm gonna get all my babies right here. I'm gonna make my own farm.
$4 billion. Wow.
A billy.
Well, they sure came up.
They sure did come up.
That was just so inhumane.
Like
It truly was.
Apparently, but we can't classify it inhumane to now to knowing what humane looks like.
Well, that still was inhumane, regardless. A woman having a baby, that's a big experience.
Yeah.
And then you don't even get her the right medical treatment for her to be able to clean herself and rest.
That was like
She got to be able to rest. She's just not going to get up and go in the field the next day.
That's what they said. In a couple weeks, they're ready for you to get back in it.
Weeks.
Your stomach stain went down.
What if you had complications?
I'm sure there were a lot of complications. I'm sure a lot of people died.
Oh my God.
But I was going to say, they used to try to have them breeding slaves like pit bull puppies, boy. This one right here, this one. That's crazy. But yeah, man, the brutal history, it says bizarre history, but I can attest, I believe that was real. I've heard that many times, but not as all the details. Okay. Like, comment, subscribe. Don't take a nosedive. Look, my chin hit the mic and everything. But comment down in the section below if you want some more of this kind of stuff.
All right,
this
guys.
was kind of rough.
Yeah, this was a rough one.
All right.
See you in the next video.
Bye.